Welcome back. At the outset of this series, I wanted to answer 4 basic questions. Who are the progressives? Where do they come from? What do they want? And why is it that they think the way that they do? The progressive nihilist is the inheritor of the tradition of revolutionary nihilism. And that's a tradition that stretches all the way back to 1789, and we find it in every single modern revolutionary movement since that time. It has not changed. Only its manifestations and its expressions have changed. We no longer ring the tocsin or man the barricades in the streets. Revolution is different today. The progressive nihilists are animated by a desire to destroy the old things. It doesn't matter what that old thing is. If it's old, it must be destroyed. And this is an impulse or a desire that we find again in every modern revolution since 1789. The desire to make a clean sweep with the past as the necessary precondition for the creation of a better world of the future. And the progressive nihilists are also animated at the same time by a historical consciousness that has its roots in the 18th century Enlightenment, and it's a belief or a conviction that history is ascendatory, that history is moving toward a destination, that there is a desirable final goal at the end of history, and that they, progressive nihilists, can will history forward toward that goal. Now, bearing this in mind, I must restate that we are living in a revolution. And we're living in a revolution because the ideology that animates the progressive nihilists, Marxism, is a revolutionary ideology at its core. If we look at every single revolution post-1848 in the 20th century in particular, every one of them was animated by this ideology. And the progressive nihilists of the 21st century are animated by the same ideology. The ideology is revolutionary. The means, again, the means may be different from the past, but this is a revolution. The ideology is revolutionary. It always has been, and it always will be. If we're looking for physical examples or physical manifestations of the revolution in our daily life, we don't have to look very far. First and paramount are speech and thought codes. Now, speech and thought codes, codes that limit or restrict what we can say, think, and feel, have been a part of revolution since 1789. Speech and thought codes and revolution walk hand in hand, and they always have. In the modern West, in our cultural institutions, in our universities, in our high schools, elementary schools, there are certain things that we dare not say, certain things that we must not think, and certain things that we ought not feel. And these speech and thought codes are an intrinsic part of revolution. They've always been a part of revolution. One of the more interesting ways that the revolution expresses itself is in the modern version of public show trials. Now, public show trials are as much a part of revolution as guns and jackboots. And a public show trial historically has been when an accused is brought before a court, a public court, and made to confess his or her ideological impurity, his or her ideological thought crimes, his or her lack of revolutionary zeal. For the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen celebrities and public figures who have taken to Twitter, Instagram, social media, Facebook, things like that, and having been caught out or found out thinking, saying, or doing something that was ideologically inappropriate, something that moved against the grains of social justice, they felt compelled to take to social media and offer a public apology. They felt compelled to publicly confess their ideological shortcomings, and these are self-correcting impulses now. These are not corrections at the point of a gun anymore. Revolution has changed. These are self-correcting public abasements. And of course, the destruction of the old ways will continue. Again, it doesn't matter what that old way is. If it's old, it must go. And again, that's in keeping with every revolution since 1789. All revolutions have been predicated on the idea that we must separate our ties with the past, because that is the necessary precondition for the creation of something better. The funny thing about revolutions, or rather it would be funny if they weren't so destructive and ruinous, but the funny thing about revolutions is that all of them have been predicated upon a misapprehension of what history is. Right? All modern revolutions from 1789 down to today have been predicated on the idea that we are evolving, that history is ascendatory, that we are progressing toward that better world of the future. But French philosopher Albert Camus, he was born in the early 20th century, and he was a witness to the revolutions and the wars that characterized the 20th century, the nihilism that characterized the 20th century. And this perplexed him, this mystified him, this belief that the revolutionaries have that history is directional, that it is moving toward a goal, that it has a final desirable state of affairs at the end. This perplexed him and mystified him as much as it does me. There is in this universe no reason to imagine the end of history. That is the only justification, however, for the sacrifices demanded of humanity in the name of Marxism. But since progress, is a value foreign to history, and since that value is at the same time foreign to ethics, it is not, properly speaking, a value on which one can base one's conduct. It is a dogma without foundation that can be adopted only as the desperate effort to escape of a mind which is being stifled by nihilism. Albert Camus. It's funny that progressive nihilists find solace and comfort from the inconsistencies of their own logic in something that does not, cannot, and will not ever exist. They're chasing something right now that does not exist. We are living at the end of an age. Not the end of days, although you may be excused for thinking it has all the characteristics of the end of days. But we're living at the end of an age. We're living as the old age is dying, the age of revolution and democracy. That age is dying right now. And we exist and are living at the dawn of a new age, the age of nihilism, the age of the full realization of the principles of modern revolution. I hold with Oswald Spengler. I believe that there are two freedoms that we have at the end of an age. The freedom to do nothing, or the freedom to do the necessary. And to me, it seems that the necessary thing to do would be to fix or rework our idea of what constitutes education. Education is key. It's the battleground. That is where the revolution is being fought. That is where the revolution is being perpetuated. Right? Young minds being shaped and formed to accept and to accommodate these ideals of revolutionary nihilism. For example, that men can become women and women can become men because there is no intrinsic nature to either men or women. That's commonly accepted as fact in our elementary and high schools today. Plato understood the critical importance of education. He understood that once bad ideas insinuate themselves into education, the consequences that follow are enormous. It is in education that disorder can most easily creep in unobserved. It only does harm because it gradually makes itself at home and quietly undermines morals and manners. And then, Socrates, it spreads into the laws and constitution with complete lack of restraint until it has upset the whole of private and public life. Plato. In 1968, at the peak of the social and cultural revolutions of the 1960s, someone somewhere in the Western world looked what was happening on university campuses in our education system. That person looked at these revolutions and said, that's our future. And it was. And in 2019, someone somewhere in the West is looking at the ideological tumult on university campuses, with its speech and thought codes, its show trials, the social justice that is meted out to conservatives on university campuses. Somebody is looking at that and saying, that's our future. And so it will be.